Welcome to What's Going On in the Statehouse, where we break down how policy really gets made in state capitals across the country. Today, we're joined by Julie George, who leads the Center of Legislative Strengthening at NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislators. Julie George directs the Center for Legislative Strengthening at NCSL, where she helps lawmakers and staff build stronger legislative institutions. She began her career as a nonpartisan staff for the Colorado Legislative Council, sparking a lifelong passion for the legislative process. With more than 20 years' experience across the state, county, and local government, Julie brings deep expertise in policy, operations, and institutional development. A Denver native, she enjoys skiing, hiking, and Colorado's 300 days of sunshine. She holds degrees from Columbia University and the University of Colorado, Denver. Julie, welcome. And before I get started, how your Denver Broncos going to do this year? They're doing much better than my Ravens.
All right. Yeah, well, it's nice to be here. It's fun to see them getting some wins this year for sure. Um, I try not to watch too much. It gives me anxiety.
There you go. Well, I decided to get my hair closer cropped so it hides my gray hairs every Sunday when my Ravens play.
For sure.
So let's kick it off. So with the legislative process, and what I want to touch on is myth versus reality. So the question I have for you, Julie, is what's the biggest misconception about how bills become laws at the state level? And then can you walk us through a recent example of a bill's journey from draft to enactment?
Sure, sure. It's actually that's a little bit of a tricky question. I don't think there is one misconception. I think it really depends, where you sit and your familiarity with the process and whether you're more accustomed and understand the way Congress works versus the way a state legislature works. So I will share for me, as you mentioned in my bio, that I started in this world a long time ago. Uh, I think I probably fibbed a little bit. I think it's more like 25, not just 20 years ago, working for the Colorado Legislative Council. And I've worked in a couple of other states, but just barely. And when I came to NCSL, I was really surprised at how different each state legislature operates. So I guess the biggest misconception is that every state legislature operates the same way, and it really doesn't. And the path a bill takes can really vary. So I think a few things I would point out. I was very surprised that in all states, not every bill gets a hearing, a public hearing. And bills get introduced, they get assigned to a committee. That's pretty much standard across legislatures. But in some states, the committee chairperson has a lot of authority, whether or not they bring a bill forward for a hearing. Another difference in some states, if a chairperson brings the bill forward, they don't have to allow for public comment. Whereas in other states, and Colorado, which I was most familiar with, every bill introduced goes to committee and there has to be a hearing and the public has to be allowed to comment. Um, Other things that I think that stand out that are really different from state to state. Some states have limits on the number of bills a legislator can bring forward, and other states don't. Um, so the volume of bills that have to make it through the process from state to state are really different. The length of the session is different from state to state. Um, and then there's other things, like, you might think that when a bill is brought forward, it's been vetted really well, like, the stakeholders have put their heads together ahead of time and, kinks have been worked out, and whereas that is often the case, sometimes it's not at all. Um, so I guess the biggest misconception is that there is one single way
Right. And it
that
shows
the
that you touched on it in terms of the power of the chairs of those committees, and it varies from states, and it shows how powerful these chairs can be where you have probably the best idea in the world as a legislator, but that proposal won't see the light of day or won't even get a hearing, and it just sits in the committee drawer, and that's it.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, for sure. Um Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, so I was just gonna say, what tends to surprise most people about the process from your experience? And these are not just, the citizens that come and participate in our legislative process, but I would say by the legislators. You have freshmen, you have senior members of the legislature, but have you encountered like freshman legislators that come in very earnest, ready to change the world, and their proposal has this long winding process?
Yeah. I think, that's another thing that is really surprising. Some folks get elected and they've never spent time in the state house. And, just deer in the headlights, when they get to that first session, even though, they have members of their party who are there to support them, and most states do an orientation of some sort. It is still a messy and chaotic process, and, and just my humble opinion, I think it takes a good few years to become a truly good legislator because there's just so much to learn, just the process itself, much less the content of the hundreds of bills and the topics that come before them and all the things that, they need to be knowledgeable about and cast their votes on. So,
Right.
um, it's you whether or not, you might agree with the legislator with their point of view, one of the things I've always felt is just the fact that somebody runs for office and gets in there and is putting themselves out there to do this hard work that, truly is hard and messy and frustrating. You really have to tip your hat to, folks who are willing to do their civic duty.
Absolutely, and it shows the importance of having an
Mhm.
orientation session for new legislators coming in, whether it's a week of orientation or a whole month of orientation prior to session, because when you go into the legislative session, you're hitting the ground running, and it is very
Mhm.
fast paced. So you're absolutely right that there are folks that come in there and they're like a deer in caught in headlights. So absolutely, that's great analogy.
Yeah.
Uh, so as a staff person, where you've worked behind the scenes, are there points where you've witnessed, where staff make or break the outcome of legislation behind the scenes? Anything that happens behind the scenes where either it's a fiscal note or the staff, like, reaches out to the attorney general and says, "Hey, this bill is do you think this is constitutionally sufficient?" What happens?
I think that probably really does depend on what state you're in. Some states have mostly partisan staff where their role is more, um, advocacy to push forward the view and the will of whomever they work for the party or the legislator they work for. Other states, like the role I had was a nonpartisan role. Um, and so as a committee staffer, I had a responsibility to guide the chairperson. I carried my rule book with me just in case there was some sort of question. We could always flip through the rule book. I had to make sure, for example, if I was staffing a House committee, that there was always a second to a motion. If I was staffing a Senate committee, they didn't need a second. I had to play that kind of role. I had to make sure committee reports were done. So I'm less familiar with staff really impacting the success of a piece of legislation versus um, trying to help and guide and ensure that the process happens the way by which it's supposed to, by the rules. So was public notice given in time? You know, was the committee meeting calendared? And so folks knew 24 hours ahead of time. It's those sorts of
Right.
things.
So the staff, your role as a staff almost is like the parliamentarian, the rule keeper. You're like the referee to make sure that the rules are followed, and it's interesting that you carried that rule book with you because that is another way that bills either die or move on if the rules aren't followed, and they're very strict on the rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to overspeak. The chairperson did not necessarily have to listen to me.
Right, exactly. Well,
As
that's the
long as I
power.
did point out, we need a second for that. Oh, you know.
So I want to jump to the unwritten rules of the State
Sure.
House. Speaking of rules, so what are some of the unwritten rules or informal steps that never make it into our civic textbooks? Something,
Yeah.
some of the rules that we don't learn in the classroom when we're being taught about government.
Yeah. Um, this is a fun question. I really like this one because there's so much that's unwritten or so much that just doesn't, would never make it into a textbook. Um, for example, being a legislator is a full-time job. That's not the case. We only have a few states where it's a full-time job and even fewer yet where the salary would allow you to live without other um income of some sort. Um, so I think that's an interesting thing, especially if you're not in the state legislative process and you're thinking of Congress. Yes, our members of Congress, it's a full-time job. They get a nice salary, they get benefits, they get all those things. Your state legislators do not. Some work for absolutely no salary. New Mexico, they get no salary. Um, so I think that's something that probably is not made real clear through like a civics handbook. Um, Another thing is that customs, traditions, and precedent matter, and these are things that aren't written down. And this was really eye-opening to me as as a staff person, and then I have learned so much more about it here at NCSL. There might be a rule that there is a limit to debate. You can only debate for so many minutes. But if the tradition and the custom is not to enforce that, then
You just
it's not enforced. So people talk as long as, they really want to in some cases, and to make it even more complicated, some legislatures don't keep a written record of those customs and traditions, and that's something I don't think you're going to find in,
Right.
a civics handbook.
How
Um
about like are these norms consistent across the states or unique to each capital? You alluded to it in the beginning where it depends on which capital you're in.
Yeah, very unique to each capital.
Right.
Even something as, and this is more about a rule, not really a custom and a tradition, but to kinda get to your point, um, even something like quorum, you have to have a quorum in order to do official business, is defined differently from state to state. It could even be defined differently from one chamber to the other, from the upper chamber to the lower chamber. It could be 50% of those present is quorum. It could be 50% of the body. It could be 50% plus 1. So it's mind-boggling, even though each state legislature is following the same general process, the rules and the details and the way in which that process is implemented varies widely.
That's it. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. And so the other question, you and I grew up watching cartoons on Saturdays, and in between cartoons, there was Schoolhouse Rock that would come in, and
Yeah.
the most famous one, in my opinion, was uh, "I'm Just a Bill" on Capitol Hill. So, with that comparison, Schoolhouse Rock comparison, how do state legislative processes differ in practice from the Schoolhouse Rock version? Schoolhouse Rock version was, U.S. government and the national government with Congress and the president. But how does it differ from the practice at the state? Let's say Colorado, uh,
Sure.
in terms of that. And I'm not going to have you sing the Schoolhouse Rock theme of "I'm Just a Bill."
Yeah. You might regret if I did that,
Exactly.
but I bet the 2 of us could do it together.
You don't want me singing, definitely.
Um, yeah, actually, I love Schoolhouse Rock, and I've actually used the video a few times when I've done presentations about the legislative process because it really is a good overview, but it is a high-level overview, and as, we've been talking about, um, that states do things very specific to the way in which, they've made these rules over the years and customs over the years. I don't think Schoolhouse Rock really talks about why parliamentary procedure is important to the process. And so as I was thinking about this question, I thought, that would be something really good to mention. So parliamentary procedure and rules, which we've mentioned, it's really kind of the glue to our um, lawmaking process, whether we're talking federal, state, or even the local level. It's like we say at NCSL, the rules are here so the majority gets their way, but the minority gets their say. And that's all because we're following this parliamentary procedure and these rules that allow an orderly debate, an orderly discussion of public policy that may or may not become law and be enacted. Um,
I could tell you my most important book in my office was when I was in the Maryland legislature was Mason's Rules
Yes.
and Rule Book. And that was
Have it right here.
there you go, right there, the red rule book.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly, NCSL, has the copyright to Masons, as Mr. Mason, put in his will
Oh,
that,
man. That's a little known
NCSL.
fact we did not know.
Yeah, so we have the copyright, and there's a commission made up of, legislative clerks and secretaries who update it every 10 years, and that is
Every 10 years.
every 10 years, so yeah.
So
But yeah, so that Mason's rule, and I think the other thing, just along those same lines, that Schoolhouse Rock doesn't touch upon is, like, precedent, that, your state constitution and judicial decisions, um, are where you go to first for answers, and if you can't find the answer there, let's just keep with quorum. Does it define quorum? No. So now I'm gonna go look at the chamber rules, so the House or Assembly rules, or the Senate rules, or the joint rules. Is it defined there? No. Okay, so now I go to statute. Is it defined there? No. And as a last, then you go to your backup parliamentary manual, which for most states it is Masons, but not every state. I think it's about 80% of the states use Masons versus Congress uses different one that's escaping me at the moment. But regardless, there is a manual of parliamentary procedure that then is turned to should whatever answer you're trying to find not be in any of those other documents. I don't think
precise.
that's, yeah, Schoolhouse Rock doesn't go into that level of detail, which is good. We would have lost the audience.
We lost the audience. He started thumbing through Mason's Rules.
Yeah, for sure.
So you spoke on about Congress, and I'm going to sort of put you on the spot a little bit. So what are the lessons? We're in the middle of a shutdown in Washington, D.C. with our government shutdown. Are there lessons that Congress could take from the states as it relates to whether it's the rulemaking, the parliamentary process? I'm not talking about the politics, but
Mm.
anything that you observed over the years to say, hey, what Congress could take this lesson from the states.
Oh boy, you are putting me on the spot there. Uh, I don't know, that's a good. It's just such different worlds. I
Well, I'll try to answer the question for you.
Okay.
I think at the state level, you're citizen legislators. You are citizens. You're there part time. You're not. There's some legislators that meet year round, but you are in the role of the founding of our country. The state legislators were citizen legislators,
Right.
and so you tend to act as citizens, following the rules of procedure and parliamentary at the state level, which I think maybe Congress can and look at. They have their own set of rules in terms of the process, but I think overwhelmingly folks may think that they're not citizen legislators. They are legislators, but not
Enough.
citizens.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
for
In
sure.
that tradition. Right.
And it's just a different playing field, most definitely.
Great. And then the last question I have for you, and then we'll wrap up, is which states do you think have particularly strong or innovative programs? Obviously, you're from Colorado and you're going to be biased to Colorado. I'm going to say Maryland since I'm from Maryland, but through your experience and your journey at NCSL, since you all handle all 50 states, uh, anything that stands out to you?
Um, well, we are nonpartisan, bipartisan. We love all of our members. I'm gonna give a real wishy-washy
I
answer
got you. That's
here.
fine. I
Um,
would say Nebraska since it's a unicameral.
Unicameral.
That's innovative.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then, you have your handful of states, your 4 states, like, that only meet once every 2 years rather than
Right.
every year, so maybe they've got it right. I think it's like Texas, North Dakota, maybe Nevada. I should know Nevada. I did some work there in Montana. Maybe those folks have it right, that we only
Right.
really
Meet every other year.
meet every other year. So, I mean, I think each state just they have things they do really well and they have things that maybe could be fine-tuned, but um I think you'd find that in any organization, any business, no matter what it is. And I don't know, I can't pick favorites. I'd get myself
I know
in
you
trouble.
can. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I get in trouble here at work.
I
We love
I
them all.
speak very highly of the NCSL. So Julie, I just want to thank you for giving us an inside look at how our state legislators really work, and for reminding us that the people and processes behind the laws matter just as much as the policies themselves. If you'd like to learn more about the National Conference of State Legislators or the Center for Legislative Strengthening, please visit ncsl.org. That's it for today's episode of What's Going On in the State House. I'm Keiffer Mitchell. Thanks for listening.